the story begins its exciting development. The narration focuses readers' attention on the character who makes the score. Here is the number 1034 changed to 1035. Apparently, he was doing some kind of exercise. The audience could draw such a conclusion based on the fact that the hero raised both hands up and clapped them. In the next episode, it became known that the action was carried out inside a building, where sunlight fell and illuminated the interior space. Among him, you could see several characters who surrounded one without clothes. The guys were in a fairly large room, which was filled with various furniture, school chairs and tables, large tanks and signs. The overweight guy was doing physical exercises. He jumped up and clapped his hands, while simultaneously keeping score, which went from 1036 to 1037. There was a wall behind him, so, apparently, they were on the porch or entrance to the building, the road to which was equipped with large gray stone slabs. Finally, the story introduced readers to this somewhat mysterious character. As it turned out, his name was Cha Mu-gyeol. He had black hair that was parted on the left side. The long side slightly covered his thick eyebrows, which on this episode gave him an excited appearance. The next picture was about how two guys filmed a character with excess weight. There was an evil grin on their smiles. The first of them, who had brown hair with long bangs that covered his forehead, burst out laughing and said out loud that everyone around him should look at the shaking legs of their buddy. The second hero picked up the joyful and malicious mood of his friend and, also through laughter, said that in any case, in his personal opinion, it was quite a funny sight. Suddenly, the overweight character fell to his feet and began to pitifully swallow air in order to restore the breathing that had strayed from excessive load on his body. Cha Mu-gyeol lowered his head and searched afterwards. He was so tired that readers could see his heavy breaths and exhalations. The guys who were standing in a pile opposite him stared questioningly. One of them put his hands in his pockets and uttered a strange sound that conveyed his surprise or bewilderment. The other, who was sitting, had black hair that was cut in the shape of a pot, swiftly flashed his evil gaze in the direction of Cha Mu-gyeol, and the third just opened his mouth and watched him. According to the following episode, a stranger took a step on the gray stone slabs and laughed. In his opinion, the situation was similar to the fact that a guy who fell to the floor and was breathing heavily from physical activity was in trouble because he was overweight, to which he made it clear that he could still continue. The boy lowered his head dejectedly, watching the speaker from under his brows, who was already standing in front of his face, which was completely wet with sweat. The stranger had brown hair neatly parted on the left. Apparently, as readers could assume, there were schoolchildren in front of them, because this guy was wearing black pants and a gray t-shirt, over which he was wearing a white long-sleeve shirt. He gave a negative answer to the guy he was looking down on, and said that, in his opinion, it was obvious that he was experiencing difficulties. Moreover, after a short period of time, the character asked him a question. The guy was interested in whether he had a desire to lose weight, although the tone of his voice gave the impression that he insisted on it more, as if it was not even a request, but an incentive to action. In the next episode, a schoolboy with a terrible character put a bucket with unknown contents in front of Cha Mu-gyeol. Aloud he uttered his request, although from his words it was an instruction or a wish, according to which the guy would have to eat again. His gaze was definitely serious, his black eyes were like an abyss, and the shadow that fell on the upper part of his face emphasized the expression of facial expressions, which allowed readers to compare him with a predator that hunted its prey. The schoolboy watched his interlocutor expectantly, and after a short period of time, I told him to start eating. Why did he get everything in his eyes? Large drops of sweat trickled down Cha Mu-gyeol's face, and the irises of the eyes almost disappeared altogether because the whites filled the surface, which only emphasized the frightened expression of the guy's face, who continued to breathe heavily. The corners of his eyes drooped involuntarily, and in the next episode, the character even pulled both of his hands, which were shaking because they were approaching the unknown contents of the iron bucket, when suddenly unknown sounds were heard. However, readers could not discern what exactly Cha Mu-gyeol was doing, because his silhouette was hidden by the tall figure of one of the schoolchildren. That's just the audience was shown his wide-open eyes, on which large tears began to appear. Suddenly, other guys entered the dialogue. One of them, a guy with brown hair pulled back in different directions, covered his mouth with his right hand and said through a terrible laugh that it was just disgusting. His friend, the hero with the black hair in the form of a pot and in a blue jacket, picked up the mood of the others and also burst into laughter, when suddenly the chief of them pushed Cha Mu-gyeol so hard that he flew back, opening his mouth in surprise and an involuntary sigh. The others approached the fallen guy and gave him a threatening order to continue eating the strange contents that were in the iron bucket. The student began to cry and silently continued to listen to the guys and wait for what they would do next in relation to him. He tried to cover his head with both hands, probably hiding his tears in this way, and mentally asked for forgiveness. Two characters stood over the overweight boy while the other two filmed what they were doing on the phone. In the next frame, the story tells readers about the thoughts of Cha Mu-gyeol. As it became known, from the very moment of his birth, he considered himself unworthy and owed something to others, as if the guy was different from his peers. He was crying, always, and the reason was that his entourage thought the same way. But everything has changed. As the new episode shows, the main character has changed a lot, and even for the better. There was no longer an overweight guy. Now he had a toned and muscular body, and all because he pulled himself together and started playing sports. For example, Cha Mu-gyeol puts his left hand back and tries to make a swinging motion. On his face, which was wet with sweat, his black eyebrows were strained, which gave him a concentrated appearance. The main character made a firm decision to conquer this world. When suddenly, in the next episode, he suddenly opened his eyes, as if waking up from some kind of dream. After a short period of time, it became clear to readers that everyone had come up with this, although they could make a rather audacious assumption that this was his goal, because they were shown the same chubby schoolboy who fell again, thanks to which he had just not made one serious mistake. The guy sat down and began to think about what he had just almost done. Large drops of sweat appeared on his face, because he understood that it was as if fate had saved him by giving him another chance. A chance to change everything. His snow-white skin has acquired red spots from indignation and misunderstanding. He cast a serious look down while simultaneously asking aloud what had just happened. Cha Mu-gyeol cursed at the top of his voice, trying to come to a sober state in this way. As it turned out, the first thought that settled in his mind told him that the main character had just risen from the dead. He raised both hands and watched them. When suddenly his silhouette appeared from above behind him, only he was different from him. This Cha Mu-gyeol was muscular and slender. Apparently, he joined the soul of an MMA athlete. The next episode tells curious readers about a fierce fight between two wrestlers. One of them, a man with dark hair shaved at the temples and the back of his head, and with an overgrown beard, dealt a crushing blow to his opponent. He was fighting a single combat with a character who was slightly below him. Due to a rough push, this guy turned his head slightly because his opponent managed to hit him. However, it did not prevent readers from describing him as a dark-haired handsome man. Suddenly, the referee's voice rang out, who announced that a very strong blow from Manhwa had been taken by Cha Mu-gyeol, but they gave him advice so that the guy would continue to keep in the same spirit and not focus attention on it. The big ring was brightly lit, making even the spectators behind it could not be seen because they were immersed in darkness. However, they continued to twist with all the might of their voice the words of support in relation to their favorites. As it turned out, according to the referee of the duel, the main character really managed to improve his defense. Readers could also notice this, because despite the fact that Manhwa continued to deliver crushing blows at a rapid pace, he failed to break him. Cha Mu-gyeol stood like a wall. Not even a single muscle on his back tensed from their intensity and strength. Suddenly, in the next episode, the main character's opponent made an uppercut on the left this time. The referee was still commenting on the actions in the ring, with the help of which readers could familiarize themselves with the terminology of the fights. Manhwa managed to slow down Cha Mu-gyeol slightly, because he, holding both hands at the ready, raised his head up, trying to dodge in this way. That's just the judge said that the guy got hit in the jaw. Now the main character stood in a protective pose, turning his head to the right side and covering it with both hands, which he raised, thus opening a view of the unprotected torso. At the next moment, Manhwa did not think for long, because he began to attack. After that, the referee again informed the curious fans of this fight that the fighter continued to beat Cha Mu-gyeol without a break. Suddenly, the pumped-up athlete lunged forward, causing a small stream of air to rise behind his hind leg, which provoked the movement of dust. Manhwa dealt a crushing blow to the main character, severely wounding him. He, in turn, did not have time to react or group properly, so he just started falling backwards. Readers could see the blood on his face, which began to flow smoothly through his body. The story described his glass eyes, the iris and pupil of which began to rise smoothly upwards. Apparently, the man stopped understanding something. Cha Mu-gyeol imagined how he, the judge, raised his left hand in a gesture that he had won, from which a bright and radiant smile appeared on the face of the main character. Even readers could notice and note for themselves that a gold medal hung on his chest. As it became known after a short period of time, the man wished with all his heart to become the strongest. In the next episode, he and another character with gray hair took photos, posing for her and hugging. It was the signing of an exclusive contract with Cha Mu-gyeol, and in the new picture, the main character dealt a crushing blow to his opponent using his left hand. And he succeeded. According to his thought processes, the guy always believed that he could do it. Suddenly, the story began to tell again around the duel between him and Makhmudov, allowing once again to show how beautifully the second man won by hitting him in the jaw. Why did Cha Mu-gyeol freeze, opening his eyes wide and relaxing his mouth? In his opinion, it was a fatal weakness, and she finally opened up. That's just all that readers have just seen was a dream. The main character folded both hands on the school desk and suddenly raised his head. His mouth was drooling, and he asked the question out loud. He was interested in what had just happened and whether he had missed anything important. An aura thickened around him, as if the guy had just done something forbidden. He was dressed in a school uniform, which consisted of a white shirt, a gray vest with a black tie and a jacket. In the next episode, the picture took him from a larger angle, allowing him to see the reaction of his neighbor, a guy with long black bangs that covered his forehead. However, this did not prevent the audience from seeing a puzzled expression of facial expressions on his face. He looked at his classmate and closely followed his actions. But Cha Mu-gyeol was trying to come to his senses at that moment. At first, the student stared somewhere in front of him, and then he turned his gaze to his plump palms. The guy gulped air greedily to catch his breath from a bad dream, which to some extent contained his true desire. In the new picture, the character folded the fist of his right hand and leaned it against his forehead. His face was covered with beads of sweat again, and the student himself gave himself up to his reflections. Based on his thoughts, it all turned out to be true. He was reborn. However, in the next second, he gave a negative answer, thus canceling everything previously said, because it was not about him, but about Cha Mu-gyeol, who had a beautiful and slender, pumped-up body. Now his ghost was sitting at the next desk of the main character. The story tells readers how two souls appeared in the air. They flew over the head of the main character and had his face. The first is either confused or scared, because she pursed her lips and strained her thick black eyebrows, and the second, on the contrary, is dissatisfied. The guy describes that they became one. An aura thickened around him, taking on a dark hue as if it was pressing on him, forcing him to make some decision or draw a conclusion. According to his thoughts of Cha Mu-gyeol, he remembered that the memory of another soul was an important component. The schoolboy cast a swift and wary glance somewhere in front of him and began to remember something. As it turned out, pictures surfaced in his head that described the actions around his second life. For example, in one of them, the main character dealt a crushing blow to his opponent, forced him to turn his head to the right side, because the push hit his face. On the second, Cha Mu-gyeol was jumping rope. On the third, he was looking down at a lying opponent who had just lost to him. Only, as it became known after a short period of time, he did not even remember the original owner of this body. According to the new episodes, the student was lying on the cold floor in the corridor of his school. He was watched by his classmates, who were squatting or standing next to lockers. In other words, according to Cha Mu-gyeol, now he had to share his memories with him. He looked at his palms again, causing his face to be covered with beads of sweat again. Even the student's gaze became more focused. After a short period of time, the main character acquainted readers with the following information. Cha Mu-gyeol was an MMA athlete. In the new episode, the guy got slapped on the left side of his chubby face. The jolt was so strong that it made him turn away. As it turned out, the actions returned to real life. In it, a schoolboy with black hair in the shape of a pot asked the others aloud if they had seen his punch. He said that if you hit in this way, you can get a concussion. His neighbor, a character in a gray t-shirt, over which was a white school shirt, asked in a surprised tone of voice whether it was true or not. That's just the one. In turn, added that for the best effect it is better to do it using a fist. When the second guy gave a positive answer, he suddenly pointed his index finger at Cha Mu-gyeol and exclaimed that he was apparently all right. The main character at this moment was sitting silently at his desk, as if he had frozen. The character probably didn't know how to react properly. A schoolboy with brown hair and a white shirt laughed and said that his non-reacting classmate was still supposedly coming to his senses, even though he had just been hit. The character in the blue coffee scratched his head in a gesture that he was thinking about something, and he will continue to talk, making the audacious assumption that Cha Mu-gyeol was really cool. At this very moment, the main character touched the cheek of the same name with his left hand and looked at them. Suddenly, after a long silence, a guy with a black pot on his head finally entered the dialogue. He strained his broad eyebrows and glanced at his neighbor, at the same time telling him that the schoolboy was embarrassing him. He then directed his eyes full of anger at the protagonist he had just scolded and asked him a question. As it turned out, he was wondering why Cha Mu-gyeol was staring at him with his mouth open. And after a short period of time, he wondered if he really wanted something worse to be done to him. Which, in fact, they did in the next second. The guy threw away the desk where the main character was sitting, which caused him to pull away and fall to the floor. The push was so strong that the student even slipped slightly. Suddenly, his friend appeared behind the bully, who asked him a question, simultaneously pulling a satisfied smile from ear to ear. As it turned out, based on the remark of the first, Cha Mu-gyeol's face exasperated him. That's all. That was the reason for his ill-mannered behavior. However, in his opinion, everything was fine with the main character. At this moment, the character was mentally trying to verify the truthfulness of what had just happened to him. He was sitting with both hands on the cold floor, supporting his back in this way. There was a certain bewilderment on his frightened face. That's just such a detached and incomprehensible reaction angered a schoolboy in a blue jacket. Readers saw how he strained his eyebrows and wrinkled his nose, saying out loud that Cha Mu-gyeol continued to look at him as if he had lost his mind. This was the reason for his next act. The guy again treated his classmate badly. That's just the main character was thinking that it wasn't painful at all. In the new episode, he was lying with his arms and legs spread out in different directions, which made his figure look like a star shape. In his opinion, it was impossible. A guy with brown hair and a white school shirt burst out laughing. He said out loud that he felt sorry for Cha Mu-gyeol because in his place he would have just faked a faint. But he said it with a satisfied grin, which even made his fox eyes shine. His interlocutor told him that the character was constantly making noise, but now they had to go to the dining room. The two guys began to gradually move away, and now, when their silhouettes were already at the front door, the main character called out to them, thus forcing them to turn around. The faces of both characters froze with bewilderment. As it turned out, Cha Mu-gyeol took a fighting stance, which was also done by his second personality, whose spirit was standing behind him. The guy addressed his abusers aloud, letting them know that they could hit him again. He closed his eyebrows and heated his gaze, as if he really meant it. He was being watched by everyone else in the classroom. For a certain period of time, the students froze either from amazement or from a funny situation. Suddenly, the character in the blue jacket asked if he had imagined it, to which the second picked up his mysterious mood and also asked if he had dreamed it all. The schoolboy with a black pot on his head took a couple of steps in the direction of his classmate, who had just been inspired, and asked him a question, according to which, what the overweight guy wanted to get or prove. And he, in turn, made a bold assumption and said it out loud, pulled a satisfied smile. He wondered if his interlocutor was afraid. That's just the character just laughed and retold his question. However, after a short period of time, he made a swinging motion with his left hand and shouted at the top of his voice that he would destroy him today. Hatred and malice were reflected on his face because of his closed eyebrows and bared teeth. When his fist approached the main character, something suddenly surprised him, or rather even alerted him, because his pupils and the iris of his eyes had shrunk to an unthinkable size. As it became known, he struck him on the right cheek, but Cha Mu-gyeol did not react to it in any way. The main character was completely calm. Moreover, even his fair skin did not turn red. What cannot be said about a guy with a black pot on his head, because he was covered with small droplets of cold sweat. The overweight student began to burst out laughing at the hilarious situation. A thought rang in his head, according to which they had another chance. The next moment, the guy in the blue jacket asked him a question, wondering what was the reason for his strange reaction. That is, laughter. And the character at that moment was thinking that people who had previously made fun of this body would be punished. How suddenly readers could notice how Cha Mu-gyeol swung, which caused his opponent's face to express some degree of fear. He managed to deliver a crushing blow, because a schoolboy with a black pot on his head did not have time to react and dodge, so he literally flew backwards. Now the guy has a chance to take revenge. The story described how all the classmates froze in amazement. Each of them opened his mouth as if they did not expect such a maneuver from the main character, who was overweight. At that moment, the push and pressure provoked the appearance of a stream of air, which, apparently, to some extent helped Cha Mu-gyeol to fly away in the opposite direction from his opponent. Moreover, the story described his red-skinned face, which stopped in front of the legs of another schoolboy. Unexpectedly for the readers and the main character, there was a sound, after which Cha Mu-gyeol opened his black eyes wide. As it became known after a short period of time, a window appeared in front of the student, in which his personal characteristics appeared. For example, height of 175 centimeters, weight of 173.5 kilograms, 18 years of age, even the city he lived in and his fighting style, On the right side there were various types of strikes and counterattack abilities. The guy indulged in his thoughts. According to them, in his previous life he was very weak. He had a weak jaw, but now he had a chance to turn all his memories into reality. He imagined how to strike his opponent again in the fighting ring. And then, in reality, attention is transferred to a schoolboy with brown hair and a white shirt, who looked down at his friend with horror. The next moment, his face was covered with cold sweat, because he cursed out loud and made the assumption that it was all like a dream. The student cast his gaze at the main character, who at that moment was thinking about the status window after waking up, which made him wonder if it was true or not. There was also a look of amazement and surprise on his face. The mission window he saw at the beginning brought him back to his rival. Cha Mu-gyeol pulled a smile from ear to ear and strained his fist, laughing suddenly. A frightened schoolboy looked at him, according to whom the main character looked very scary. He even bared his teeth and strained his eyebrows, which greatly emphasized his small wrinkles around his eyes. The overweight guy was taking steps in the direction of his opponent, who literally froze, when suddenly he decided to speak, trying to seem brave. The schoolboy, in a demanding tone of voice, made it clear to his approaching classmate that he did not even dare to touch him. Moreover, he should stay away from him. Suddenly, Cha Mu-gyeol, whose face expressed disgust, entered the dialogue. He asked a question to a guy with brown hair, according to which the main character wanted to know if his classmate liked to eat solid food. However, there was a stunned reaction in Togo, because he narrowed one eye and asked the question again. And the main character, slightly tilting his head, explained that in the future it would be difficult for a character in a white shirt to chew. Moreover, there was a high probability that he would even lose a few teeth. However, he, in turn, viciously swore and tried to stop the threat from the speaker. Suddenly, the story informed readers that a combat mission had begun, according to which the main character had to fight with hooligans. The guy grabbed his classmate with brown hair and pulled his collar, rejected him, looked at him questioningly. After a short period of time, the picture showed the audience that the mysterious task was for Cha Mu-gyeol to collect 30 teeth from a school bandit, for which he would receive a reward of 20 points. The main character spoke out loud, telling his opponent that he would not stop. As it turned out, the combat mission was already completed on 2/30. Therefore, he swung and shouted at the top of his voice that it was time to take the third one first. From his strong blow, the schoolboy even got blood. However, he made a firm decision to become a champion. The story continues its rapid development. This time the story is about two fighters who are fighting in the ring. It was Manhwa and the main character. The first of them struck Cha Mu-gyeol, causing his nose to bleed. The opponent forced the guy to step back a little, because the push hit his face hard. The referee shouted at the top of his voice, thus attracting the attention of the audience. In his opinion, it was a perfect ending and a very dangerous fight, but amazing at the same time. Everyone was rooting for Manhwa's fatal elbow strike. The judge in the ring raised both hands, crossing them, which meant the end of the fight. At this moment, the winner approached the viewer and stood in a pose that symbolized his strength and power over the main character. The confrontation was over. That's just as it became known based on the thoughts of Cha Mu-gyeol. From the beginning of the fight, the match had to fail. The reason was that in Manhwa, who at that time was rejoicing at the victory, spreading his arms in different directions, the muscles were in shape thanks to steroids. It was all a hoax, but the character still wanted other fighters to be in his place, because he himself felt like a scapegoat. At that moment, the guy was lying under Yves. He was dressed in a hospital uniform, covered with a white blanket. Suddenly he opened his eyes and began to observe what was around him, when suddenly someone touched his forehead with his hand, which greatly frightened Cha Mu-gyeol, so much so that his eyes widened to an unprecedented size. The stranger called him by name and asked him a question, according to which he wanted to know what it was. After a short period of time, the story introduced readers to a new character. He was a man with gray hair and stubble. He pulled a satisfied grin and looked at the lying guy. As it turned out, he hoped that Cha Mu-gyeol would do what he wanted, but the guy didn't listen to him. Although, as the stranger put it, he didn't care. In the next episode, viewers found out why he was so happy. The reason was simple and obvious. It consisted in the fact that thanks to the main character, the image of a man became clean again. Moreover, the character even thanked him. He leaned slightly towards Cha Mu-gyeol to show him his phone, which had some kind of video on the screen. As it became known to readers, it was about the conference of CEO Jang. It was the same character who visited the main character. He was dressed in a strict black suit and was holding some paper in his hands. The character said out loud that everyone's hope, that is, Cha Mu-gyeol, may have been the first Korean to become a WFC champion. That's just Jang Yong-gil was forced to reluctantly inform the audience that the fighter had left MMA. From this phrase, the main character's eyes seemed to come out of their orbits, because even the iris was not visible in them, only the protein. The man continued to talk on the video about what he thought about the correctness of this choice. Moreover, he bowed his gray-haired head and made a promise that Jang Yong-gil would take care of Cha Mu-gyeol for the rest of his life. From this, the main character became even more drooping. As it turned out, the man made a bold assumption, although it might seem that he was sure that the people from above had made a firm decision to get rid of the guy. From this remark, a smug smile appeared on his face from ear to ear, when suddenly someone interrupted his monologue by entering the door. When Jang Yong-gil turned his head over his left shoulder, he saw several men in uniform. He tensed his eyebrows, which made his facial expressions seem ominous, and was surprised at how quickly they came. Then he pointed with his left hand at the main character, who was watching motionlessly and could not even turn his head, let alone answer, and exclaimed that it was their elder who did not want to listen to him. There was a smile on his face that reflected madness and craziness to some extent. In his opinion, Cha Mu-gyeol's condition should have been the reason that would provoke them to listen to him more carefully. Moreover, none of them wanted anyone to hit him on the head, and even from the back. At this moment, the men lined up in a row and gave a positive response in chorus. When Jang Yong-gil and the rest of the fighters walked out the door, the gray-haired character turned to the main character and instructed him to be a good boy and be healthy, even if he could no longer fight. The man supplemented his monologue with a phrase according to which Cha Mu-gyeol was no longer supposed to teach his juniors. Readers could see how disgust was reflected in his gaze. He left the character alone in a dark room. The guy gave himself up to his thoughts, according to which, due to a severe injury leading to paralysis, only his eyes, which were streaming with tears, could move. In his opinion, he was alive, but as dead. The picture began to lead the narrative around Cha Mu-gyeol with excess weight. He was at school, sitting at his desk with both hands folded on it. Apparently, the guy was thinking about something, not like his neighbor who lay down and probably slept. As it turned out, the main character indulged in his thoughts. He wondered if it was an illusion after death and coming back to life. The character made a demonstrative exhalation, as if this situation weighed on him. But when he pointed out to the audience the blue window with his personal characteristics, Cha Mu-gyeol noticed to himself that it looked quite realistic. Suddenly, 5 plates with different fighting values appeared in front of his eyes: resistance, deflection, pain, knee strike, boxing. Based on his reflections, the character fought really badly before he died. Moreover, in his previous life, he didn't even have time to train. Readers may have noticed how his large black eyes reflected a window of resilience. That's just, in his opinion, boxing could still be learned. And when he realized that he wanted to learn another skill, his body was not sufficiently trained. At this point, the guy's nostrils narrowed and the corners of his lips dropped down. However, this time it was different. One of the reasons was the fact that in addition to all these techniques, SSS durability appeared. The story told how the main character carefully studied the status window. In his mind, he thought that thanks to him and his body, Cha Mu-gyeol would be able to return to his dream once again. The guy indulged in memories, according to which he was lifted on his shoulder by either comrades or coaches, and he himself held the winning prize, a belt. Around him, everyone was happy about his victory, so they gesticulated and whistled vividly. Suddenly his thoughts were interrupted. Someone opened the door to the office and deliberately slammed it hard. A figure of a tall character appeared in the classroom, wearing a black t-shirt, over which was a white shirt with long sleeves. He had brown hair cut in the shape of a pot, which slightly did not reach his thick black eyebrows. His potato nose attracted all the attention of readers. An angry schoolboy crossed the threshold and put his right hand in the pocket of his black pants, shouting angrily about something. Apparently, he was looking for someone. Cha Mu-gyeol turned his head towards him with a completely relaxed expression when he appeared and thought that maybe he should have started with this character. When the enraged guy was right in front of the main character's face, he asked with some indignation if he was the one who touched his friend. The schoolboy put both hands in his pockets, strained his eyebrows, which made his gaze seem very heavy. That's just Cha Mu-gyeol gave himself up to his thoughts, according to which, after defeating Young-woo and Hong Kwang-woo, rumors quickly spread. His reaction was somewhat inhibited. He parted his plump lips and looked questioningly at the speaker. And after a short period of time, the main character gave a positive answer, but he said it without a shadow of fear. Mentally, Cha Mu-gyeol expressed his gratitude to these guys, when suddenly he struck a couple of blows to an angry schoolboy, while he was completely not expecting it. The guy exclaimed that it was a Dempsey roll. It was as if he was playing with his opponent, not giving him a chance and time to defend. Only readers noticed how this schoolboy with a brown pot on his head shouted at the top of his voice to spare him, turned around and ran to the exit. The narration focused on his right hand, which picked up some white object with a red tint. The main character squatted down and began to examine the novelty, at the same time thinking that, in his opinion, everything should have ended if he got them as soon as possible. But that continued to last. The guy made a bold assumption that the children could not control their emotions. That's just when he expressed his gratitude to them for their teeth, but suddenly he was interrupted from his thoughts again. Cha Mu-gyeol heard someone swear, so he made a surprised expression and looked in the direction where the noise was coming from. As it turned out, it was a girl with medium-length brown hair. Her bangs covered her eyebrows, which made it difficult to see the full expression of her facial expressions. However, according to her remark, the main character was very good at fighting. The schoolgirl put her right hand on her side and held the phone with her left. Suddenly, the story changed the narrative. This time she was describing a street space. Apparently, it was already evening, because the last rays of the sun illuminated a tall building surrounded by a stone fence. In the next episode, readers' attention was focused on a dark room full of junk. Inside it was a group of schoolchildren. One of the guys called the name of the main character, insulting him in a new remark. As it turned out, a schoolboy in a blue jacket and with a black pot on his head was having a dialogue with him. He indignantly made it clear that it was true. His thick eyebrows closed, making his gaze look like a predatory one. The guy wondered when Cha Mu-gyeol had time to learn boxing and give him and his friend a couple of crushing blows. On the other side of the conversation was a student with a brown t-shirt, over which was a white shirt. This character had dark hair pulled back. He dabbled in illegal substances and angrily pulled a smug grin when his friend started talking about boxing. Then the guy laughed it all. After a short period of time, it became clear to readers what the reason was. The stranger felt that the main character should have gone through a few more training sessions. When he put his hands in his pockets and was silent for a while, the character in the blue jacket addressed him as Ju Sing. His eyes, which had shrunk to an unimaginable size, reflected fear. Small drops of cold sweat even flowed down his face, and he, in turn, bared his snow-white teeth and strained his eyebrows, thus emphasizing the wrinkles around his black eyes. He asked the question, according to which the others had any problems. However, the guys spread their hands in different directions and gave a negative response in chorus, at the same time asking Ju Sing to calm down his ardor and temper, referring to the fact that Chong-woo still did not know. And also there were still a lot of those who knew that the guy was really good at judo. And the student himself said that even though Cha Mu-gyeol had learned one or two techniques, regardless of his skills, if the student caught him, the main character would have to pay. In the next episode, the story described his dark eyes, which had shrunk to such a size that the guy could be compared to a madman. He pulled a smile from ear to ear and said that it was time to get down to business, to teach the arrogant guy a lesson. Who, by the way, at that moment arched his left eyebrow and lowered the tips of his lips, which made his expression express a certain detachment, although more disgust. In front of him was a heroine with dark hair who kept telling him that he was very unusual. Moreover, she was interested in the question, according to which where the guy learned to fight like that. However, apparently, the student was dissatisfied with such attention towards him, so he made it clear to her that he himself did not know who she was. Cha Mu-gyeol asked her to stop following him. The reason was that they were in the men's room. But the stranger didn't care at all, because she even asked the question what was the matter. The student told her interlocutor that wherever he went, she would still find information about him. This phrase made the main character come to the conclusion that this girl was out of her mind. The next moment, the heroine said that it was the perfect time to deal with bullies. Why did the guy ask what she was talking about? And after a short period of time, he asked her to forget about all this. But the stranger continued to stand her ground. She crossed both arms and added, making an offer to her classmate to catch all the guys with a bad reputation. However, according to Cha Mu-gyeol, he was not interested in this in any way. The main character asked what her name was. In the next episode, the story showed readers that the main character was only thinking about fighting. He mentally appealed to Jang Yong-gil with a request to return to MMA. His cheeky face showed diligence and firmness. As it became known, for a rematch, he first had to get into the RFC, a professional league for young and promising fighters. Then the guy gave himself up to thoughts. In his previous life, he had already received a gold medal once. He was only interested in the question of whether he should have started boxing again. When the guys crossed the threshold, the girl exclaimed at the top of her voice that her interlocutor had not responded to her claims. The next moment, someone pushed Cha Mu-gyeol with his shoulder. The guy turned his head and looked up slightly, because the stranger was taller than him. It was Ju Sing. The guy was looking down at him, pulling a smug grin, which could make readers disgusted at the sight of him. Suddenly, the schoolboy delivered a crushing blow to the main character using his left leg. The push was so strong that the guy with the extra weight flew off several meters, sliding all the while on the floor. A girl with dark hair stood up for him. However, Ju Sing didn't even pay attention to her because he just gave the order to take her away, which, in fact, happened in the following seconds. The bully looked at his comrades, who stood in an attacking pose, and asked them what they were doing. The schoolboy also said, adding that it was better for these guys to get out of there before he immobilized them too. One of them gave a positive answer, referring to the fact that he was about to leave. Ju Sing then called out to the big-built guy, telling him to hold the girl very tightly. Readers could notice how the heroine was holding the phone at that moment as if she was filming everything that was happening. In the next episode, the story focuses readers' attention on Cha Mu-gyeol, who slightly stood up, leaning on both hands behind his back. It was difficult for him because of the excess weight. His face was full of rage. The student gave only one name, Baek Ju-song. At that moment, the guy took a couple of steps in his direction and made it clear that they were not friends. Moreover, he was told that the main character was looking for him. When the schoolboy found himself in front of Cha Mu-gyeol, who was already standing on both legs, he asked him, wondering what he wanted from him, making the audacious assumption that he wanted to arrange a fight. The bully laughed without much shyness, and at this moment, the main character's face became more serious, apparently due to the fact that his interlocutor decided that he wanted to crush him. In the next episode, Baek Ju-song took out his phone and asked him a question out loud. He wondered if the guy had forgotten about one video. As it became known after a short period of time, Cha Mu-gyeol was on it, who was jumping and clapping his hands at the same time. From this, the schoolboy's eyes narrowed to an incredible size. That's just the bully continued to put pressure on him morally, saying that it wasn't all, because it was just the last video shot. The faces of his friends became smug, and the expression of the girl's facial expressions, on the contrary, surprised. The next moment, the story focused readers' attention on a new remark by Baek Ju-song, who said out loud that they would shoot another video today. The character stuck out his tongue as if he was teasing the guy. Except Cha Mu-gyeol wasn't going to stand for it. He hit the hand of his interlocutor, in which there was a phone, which caused him to drop it. The bully swore out loud and bared his snow-white teeth, but at the moment his eyes became more surprised. As it turned out, the reason was that the main character was going to deal him a crushing blow, which made everyone present surprised. The story described how Baek Ju-song's right cheek turned red from the flowing blood. He was swallowing hard, thus restoring his breath, which had been lost from surprise. Mentally, the bully did not understand how he could allow such a thing. He glared fiercely at his opponent, who clenched his fist at that moment. The main character uttered a remark aloud, according to which he momentarily forgot who was his real target for revenge. His figure was looking down at his opponent. The sunlight fell on his back, thus darkening his face and the front part of his torso, making his silhouette seem cruel. But the bully was still wondering. He couldn't figure out who Cha Mu-gyeol really was. The story continues its rapid development. This narration begins with a description of the fight between the main character and Baek Ju-song. While the second one was trying to somehow neutralize his opponent, Cha Mu-gyeol dodged, making various groupings or attacks. They moved at such a fast speed that a small stream of air appeared in the room, which lifted dust from the dirty floor. Such a reaction on the part of the student greatly unnerved the bully. He even mentally cursed and cursed him. When the main character stopped, he lowered his left hand and clenched the other into a fist and pressed it to his side. And readers might have noticed how his legs, folded together, froze in the air, as if he was about to give out some intricate trick. At this moment, Baek Ju-song, with a red cheek, greedily swallowed puffs of warm air to restore heavy breathing. Large drops of sweat began to flow down his face, which apparently meant that the guy got up to fight hand to hand. The bully strained his thick brown eyebrows, which made his black eyes look heavy. And mentally, the schoolboy reflected on the fact that only a few days had passed, and something had definitely happened to Cha Mu-gyeol. The story describes how both characters took a defensive pose. They bent their knees slightly, lowered their pelvis, and gave their body weight a little forward, and also put their hands in front of them in time to either grab the opponent or neutralize him. All you had to do was strike and keep your distance. Suddenly, the attack was launched by Baek Ju-song, who rushed towards his opponent, cursing at him at the same time. The plan was to grab him by the collar and get it over with. That's just the school bandit failed to crush his opponent, because the main character struck him first, and even right in the jaw. The push and pressure were so lightning fast that the bully flew away from him, closing his eyes and opening his mouth in a quiet scream. The other guys didn't understand anything. Moreover, they did not understand how to react correctly, because one of them, a schoolboy with a brown pot on his head, strained his thick eyebrows, which caused his facial expressions to express anger and hatred. And the second, a large-built schoolboy with a short haircut, opened his mouth in amazement and eyes wide. The second asked the first if they should help their friend. But he, in turn, gave a negative answer, referring to the fact that Ju-song told them not to interfere, because he wanted to do everything himself. Moreover, the guy Houston was also engaged in judo. However, after this remark, he was no longer sure that the bully had succeeded. Readers saw a drop of doubt in his face, which was covered with cold sweat. Suddenly, the story began to describe a picture in which Baek Ju-song grabbed the main character by the collar and shouted at the top of his voice with joy that he had caught him. But his cheerful and enthusiastic mood did not last long, because it instantly changed to a repulsively surprised one. The guy opened his mouth and said nothing. His cheek was swollen and his mouth was bleeding. As it turned out, the student's reaction was a little slow, because he had just realized that he had managed to catch his opponent. Therefore, a smug smile appeared on his face, which rose only at one corner. The school bandit shouted at the top of his voice that it was time to end everything. Only something interrupted him and made him watch nervously. After a short period of time, readers became aware that the main character made a lunge on his left leg and struck a crushing blow with his right hand. Now the bully's blood was pouring not only from his mouth, but also from his nose. Apparently, he temporarily lost consciousness from a strong push, because the audience could note to themselves how he rolled his eyes up. And then they were allowed to see his tooth, which seemed to float in the air. Cha Mu-gyeol's blows caught Baek Ju-sun by surprise, because he did not even have time to react to new ones, inaccurately fend them off. And now another fist was flying at him, which provoked the appearance of another tooth in space. The bully seemed to have lost the pupils and irises of his eyes, replaced by only the white, which gave his look a somewhat insane appearance. And the school bandit himself seemed to be flying in the air under the pressure of the character's blows. Once again, the guy mentally cursed. The reason was simple and obvious. Everything did not go according to his plan. In the next episode, the story describes a picture in which two guys from his group and a girl who was on the side of Cha Mu-gyeol were standing. One of the faces reflected incomprehension and even surprise. Apparently, they were waiting for the end and wanted to see how the situation would turn out, and in whose favor. The main character struck at Baek Ju-song again, causing him to literally fly back. And when he landed on the cold stone floor, he involuntarily turned his head to the right side. His eyes were completely white, as if he was a ghost. Readers could have noticed how his second cheek became swollen. Cha Mu-gyeol stood with his legs wide apart and looked down at him, while the girl with dark hair was filming everything on her phone. Suddenly the main character spoke, who was finally happy about something, which made the three open their mouths in surprise and watch something expectantly. As it turned out, the thing was that an overweight student jumped up, raising both hands up and shouted with delight that he had managed to accumulate 30 teeth. And so the combat mission was over. He continued to admire, which only caused others to be in a sense of anxiety. The story continued its rapid development. In the new episode, she describes the bright lights from the glowing windows, because it was already dark outside. This time, a dark blue window popped up in front of the main character, according to which the guy managed to collect 30 teeth from school bullies, for which he had already received 20 points. And Cha Mu-gyeol himself sat on the futon and beat his sides, at the same time rejoicing and shouting at the top of his voice about it. The character pulled on a smug smile, slightly baring his snow-white teeth, and began to think about what he could do with his reward in the form of 20 points. Suddenly, cards with different techniques appeared in front of him. These were counterattack skills, fortitude, boxing, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, kicking. The guy was surprised by the third and fourth abilities, because they belonged to Class BF. In the next episode, the main character crossed both arms on his chest and carefully examined the novelties, simultaneously thinking about something important. As it became known after a short period of time, the most difficult thing in his life before was the struggle. Cha Mu-gyeol remembered how he knocked over his opponents, and they him. Wrestling helped him a lot, but if a person didn't know jiu-jitsu, then he had no choice but to lose. After this thought, a drop of sweat ran down his fair skin, his eyebrows frowned, and his eyes narrowed. That's just his gaze became more attentive, as if he was a predator who was hunting for his prey. Readers became aware of the reason why the main character began to behave like this. It was that in order for him to become one of the MMA fighters in the future, he should have studied jiu-jitsu. That's why Cha Mu-gyeol pulled his index finger and chose the function of the same name. This provoked the appearance of a bright blue color, a variety of similar cards with other movements, which glowed with a bright light poured into space. It even made the main character spread his arms in different directions in surprise. He opened his mouth and watched the situation in surprise, when suddenly everything stopped. The character was sitting on the case and leaned on both hands, slightly leaning back. Readers may have noticed how he gulped air greedily to recover his breath from the overwhelming emotions. Cha Mu-gyeol looked at his palms and rarely pulled a satisfied smile from ear to ear, baring his even and snow-white teeth. Mentally, he thought that it was amazing. The reason was that all the techniques immediately came to his mind. And now he's a jiu-jitsu master. The main character stood on both legs and strained his right arm, clenching his fist at the same time. This pose meant victory, because all the information immediately entered his head. Moreover, he will need a lot of time if he continues to study at school. Cha Mu-gyeol looked down. Readers could follow how he looked at his stomach. According to the character's thoughts, all he had to do was take care of his body. In the next episode, the guy was already running down the funny street, dressed in a black sports uniform. However, the story decided to switch the audience's attention to a group of schoolchildren who were sitting in a dark room and having a conversation. One of them asked a question. He was interested in who the main character was, because he wasn't that good from the very beginning. That's just such a reaction provoked his interlocutor with a brown pot on his head. This character, with both hands in his pockets, cursed at him and wondered if he was specifically testing the limits of his anger. However, a schoolboy with a large build and short haircut exclaimed, spitting, how Cha Mu-gyeol managed to change in such a short time. The beaten Baek Ju-sung, in a demanding tone of voice, gave the order for everyone to be silent, because it was their fault why he looked like worse. There was a large patch on each swollen cheek of the guy, and his left eye was almost not visible at all. A friend approached him and asked what he thought about it. He asked him a question, according to which is Baek Ju-sung going to stay in the same state? After all, shouldn't they at least have taught a lesson to a cheeky classmate? But his monologue was interrupted by another character, a guy with brown hair and a potato nose. In his opinion, the former would not have been able to handle it on his own, citing the fact that hadn't he seen Cha Mu-gyeol fight. After this remark, everyone in the dark room fell silent, indulging in their thoughts. According to the thoughts of one of them, it was a complete disgrace, when suddenly someone interrupted the unfortunate silence. He diluted the situation by saying a remark based on which, if Ju-sung allows him to take revenge, he will do everything in his power. This made the school bully react questioningly, who cast his gaze in the direction of the noise. Readers got acquainted with a new character. He was a guy with wavy dark hair and small eyes set wide apart. He had thick bushy eyebrows that grew towards the end. The mysterious hero asked where Cha Mu-gyeol was now, whom he had just scolded out loud. They decided to hold a vote. At this very moment, the main character was engaged. He was wearing a black sports uniform and was honing his punches while fighting with someone invisible. Readers could note for themselves how he greedily gulped air to restore heavy breathing. However, the guy still continued to improve his skills by boxing in space, when suddenly someone interrupted his studies, called Cha Mu-gyeol by name. The character stopped and turned his head over his right shoulder, casting a surprised glance in the direction from which the noise was heard. As it turned out, it was his new friend who asked him if he always did that. She was wearing a white tank top and blue denim shorts. The girl crossed both arms over her chest and walked towards her classmate. The main character asked her what exactly she was talking about. After a short period of time, the schoolgirl answered him, focusing on breathing through her mouth, because she did not understand how it helped, so from her lips one could hear the assumption that it somehow accelerated the process. However, Cha Mu-gyeol said it was just a habit. In the next episode, viewers saw her radiant smile, which was accompanied by a remark, according to which another time the girl invited a classmate to come to her new channel and help her with the video, and added on her own that, in her opinion, the habit of breathing with her mouth was very unusual and strange. The story described how the main character's face was covered with large streams of sweat from doing push-ups. The guy said out loud that he wasn't interested, but the stranger still didn't understand him. She sat down and crossed her legs, explaining that 700,000 YouTube subscribers had invited him. For this simple and obvious reason, he should have been grateful. Moreover, she was interested in why this character trained so hard, so one thought arose in her head, based on which he wanted to become a real fighter. The last words took the character by surprise to some extent, because he stopped doing push-ups, leaning on both hands and his right leg, turned his head over his right shoulder, and looked at the interlocutor. The girl, by the way, was unapproachable. It might seem so to readers, because she said that there was a lot of news on YouTube right now. The heroine made a bold assumption that he did not fight this, so surprise appeared on her face. And in the next episode, she asked for his attention and showed him something on her smartphone. As it became clear after a short period of time, the schoolgirl presented a general training program for fighters. The winner could receive 200 million won and will have the right to work out in the gym. When the guy looked at her, his eyebrows and lips relaxed with interest. The girl explained that all beginners in martial arts are very happy to join her. Moreover, she was firmly convinced that he knew about it because he had trained so hard. Cha Mu-gyeol took a cursory glance at his black eyes, which after a short period of time became huge from stupefaction. Suddenly, a crazy thought came to the head of the main character. He decided to take revenge on Jang Yong-gil because now it is possible. In the next episode, readers could see the message that came to the heroine's phone. The guy with a dark hair color wrote to her. However, it would be difficult for readers to identify his facial features because the photo was Maltese in size, but the content could only be read. According to him, the stranger asked the interlocutor a question in order to find out if some student was studying with her in the same educational institution. As it became known based on the words of the heroine herself, this character often wrote to her. They stared at the phone questioningly, when suddenly the schoolgirl turned to Cha Mu-gyeol and said that he should be grateful for talking to her, to which he simply gave a positive answer without a shadow of interest. The main character wondered if that user was a famous person, when suddenly his friend, for some unknown reason, uttered the word no. That is why the student turned his head over his right shoulder and began to watch the speaker questioningly. However, there was some kind of horror or regret on her face. The girl arched her eyebrows and looked at Cha Mu-gyeol, asking him what it was. As it turned out, when he was fighting with Baek Ju-song, someone was filming them. The heroine showed him a video in which the guys stood opposite each other and used their fists. The file was signed as Chaos Reigns in the School. In addition, the situation was similar to the fact that this video was edited, and it showed that the main character was just trying to neutralize his opponent. The story informed readers about the occurrence of angry comments. This made the student even more furious. He arched his left eyebrow and bared his teeth, looking at the smartphone screen that his friend was holding. She asked what they should do now. The narration described how the main character mentally cursed Baek Ju-song, who not only attacked him, but also framed him. Suddenly, something caught Cha Mu-gyeol's attention. The stunned one called Yun-min by name. Now readers have finally found out what her name is. The girl turned her head towards the speaker who asked her to help. Silence hung between the guys for a while. Apparently, the heroine did not expect that her classmate would ask her for anything at all. Therefore, her reaction was somewhat inhibited, because she just asked as if she hadn't heard. In the next episode, the story describes to the audience how something started. And at that moment, a dark background appeared before their eyes, which was diluted by a brown chair, a blue keyboard and a mouse. After a short period of time, it became known that it was a real-time chat, which was already watched by 28 people. According to the comments, users have been waiting for his appearance for a long time. Moreover, they would like to see who still led the live broadcast. One of them asked the blogger to show his cute face. And unexpectedly for the readers and viewers of the hour, Cha Mu-gyeol appeared on a black background. For this simple and obvious reason, the comments seemed to explode, because in the opinion of subscribers it was a kind of fraud. Because they knew that the chat belonged to Yun-min. Sitting in a pink room in front of a lamp and a computer, the main character lowered his head, as if he was guilty, and introduced himself. After that, several characters made the audacious assumption that they had already seen him, which is why they made the unanimous decision that Cha Mu-gyeol had done something to the girl. However, the student was unshakable. He continued his monologue. The reason he borrowed Mina's channel was to discuss that viral video. Users asked him to sing a song or call from his brother, but others wrote that he pretended to be a victim. The main character gave a positive answer, which meant that he was the person who crushed Baek Ju-song. In the next episode, the guy lifted the left corner of his lips, causing a cheeky expression to freeze on his face. He said aloud, addressing his abuser, that he would soon deal with him once and for all. As it turned out, Baek Ju-song himself and his company were watching this broadcast, and the students heard how Cha Mu-gyeol threatened them that he would make them pay for everything. The story continues its rapid development. This time, the narrative describes to readers how Cha Mu-gyeol gave a positive answer, which meant that it was he who crushed the ill-mannered Baek Ju-song. The guy pulled an ill-fated smile, baring his snow-white teeth. Moreover, he will get rid of him as soon as possible and make him suffer punishment. The student himself with a swollen right cheek was covered with large drops of sweat. Apparently, he was nervous because his opponent's words made the guy's saggy soul swear. His friends, who rode over his battered figure, picked up his mood and tried to make sure whether Cha Mu-gyeol had gone crazy. His second acquaintance asked, squatting down, what they needed to do now, because according to him, the main character would definitely come for him. However, Baek Ju-song decided to appear brave. He stood up on both feet and straightened up, simultaneously shouting at the top of his voice that there was no need to be afraid. The reason was simple and obvious. The public was on their side, so the main character couldn't do anything if they didn't resist. That's just in the next episode, someone interrupted from the conversation. Someone came into the room, who repeated his last remark, based on which the students will be interested to see what he will do. The three characters turned their heads in the direction from where the noise came from. Surprise was reflected on their faces. After a short period of time, the story showed the readers Yoon-min and Cha Mu-gyeol. The guy leaned his left hand on the glass handrail and watched his classmates with a calm expression of facial expressions. But the girl giggled viciously. She pulled a winning smile in a gesture that they literally just caught someone red-handed. In her right hand, the heroine held a black tripod with a phone and filmed the reaction of the trio. When Baek Ju-song looked at Cha Mu-gyeol and Yoon-min with a swollen right cheek, readers could notice how drops of cold sweat flowed down his face. Moreover, his black eyes seemed to have been swallowed up by the white space, because from alertness and dazed, the iris and pupils seemed to have disappeared. He opened his mouth and watched his classmates. In the next episode, the main character finally entered into a dialogue. He strained his thick black eyebrows and pulled a victorious smile, at the same time saying that, of course, Cha Mu-gyeol should have beaten Baek Ju-song until he resisted. As it turned out, the guys were standing in the same place where they shot the video when the main character was doing physical exercises. The bright rays of the sun illuminated the space filled with various pipes and tanks. Suddenly, an overweight schoolboy with distraught eyes said out loud that he should let his opponent draw a conclusion. According to the first, the guy asked a question based on which Baek Ju-song would like to be neutralized, and then he would start resisting. But the second option was that a self-confident schoolboy could be defeated during a fight. Then came the comments that called Cha Mu-gyeol a gangster. At this moment, the main character turned to the audience and made it clear to them that they could really claim it. Moreover, he even gave their address. As it became known after a short period of time, the guys were in the back park of the Jungmok school. View messages from viewers said that at the moment this is the real-time video that was most often searched for. Cha Mu-gyeol stood in the left corner to open a view of the rest of the hooligans. Baek Ju-song cast a furious glance at his opponent and mentally cursed at him, while simultaneously indulging in reflections according to which he was interested in what he needed to do. The guy was curious whether he just had to run away or not. Suddenly, someone addressed the character by name, causing his black eyes to shrink to an unthinkable size. Moreover, drops of sweat began to flow on his fair skin. As it turned out, it was the main character. He turned in the direction of his abuser and with a smile on his face said that he should not have run away. The reason was simple and obvious. Cha Mu-gyeol made a promise to catch up with him if he did run, and then crush him. All this time, Yoon-mina was holding a tripod with a phone and taking pictures. Moreover, the student scolded him, saying that Baek Ju-song could go and complain to his mother. From this remark, the guy strained his eyebrows, bulged his eyes, which greatly emphasized his wrinkles in the upper part of his face, and bared his snow-white teeth, which caused readers to trace the appearance of swollen veins on his jaw. However, the main character did not stop there. He asked his rival if he really grew up in a dysfunctional family, because judging by his behavior, this was also possible. Some commentators even admired how witty Cha Mu-gyeol was. In the next episode, Baek Ju-song took off his long-sleeve white shirt and gave his classmate a positive response. He started to take steps in his direction, at the same time shouting at the top of his voice that they really needed to fight. But, as it might seem, the main character was only pleased with such a reaction, because he sincerely smiled and said that now it was the same Baek Ju-song that he knew. The guy clapped his hands, holding his boxing gloves with his right hand, and the next time he threw them in the red helmet at the feet of the opponent, which made him stop for a while. Cha Mu-gyeol made it clear in a demanding tone of voice that he should take them. Baek Ju-song, in turn, arched one eyebrow at his classmate's demanding tone and opened his mouth without making a sound. He cast an incomprehensible glance at the main character, who asked him a question in retaliation. The guy was wondering what he was doing because he literally just told him to put them on. At this time, Cha Mu-gyeol himself was pulling on blue wrestling gloves and perplexedly watching the further actions of his interlocutor. But the school bully didn't want to follow his lead. He got angry, readers could tell by the expression on his face. The guy arched both eyebrows, opening his black eyes wide, which gave his look a wild look, like an angry predator. Baek Ju-sung shouted at the top of his voice words that meant he hated the overweight character. He made it clear that he didn't need the red gloves and helmet, so he kicked them away with his left foot. The demonstrative action on the part of the student forced Cha Mu-gyeol to ask him a question, according to which he wanted to make sure whether the bully really did not need them. In the next episode, the story described how the main character jumped, and readers could follow and note for themselves how both of his legs seemed to freeze in the air, pushing off from the stone gray floor. That's just the overweight character was only happy with this outcome of events for the simple and obvious reason that, in his opinion, it would be a fair fight. His figure was hidden by the shadow, but this did not prevent you from seeing the evil expression of his gaze on his face, and the blue glove, which was making a swinging movement, preparing to strike his opponent. The story focused on his hand, around which a dark repulsive aura appeared. Apparently, such a sharp activity on the part of Cha Mu-gyeol made the school bandit nervous, because his eyes grew to an unthinkable size, and a drop of cold sweat flowed down his left cheek. After a short period of time, the audience could see how the main character dealt a crushing blow to the jaw of his opponent, around which even a bright orange glow appeared. The blue glove made Baek Ju-sung turn his head to the right side, although one of his eyes was still open. That's just it didn't matter for the simple and obvious reason that the student didn't have time to react, dodging, or use a counterattack. However, apparently, he was just preparing because his left hand, clenched into a fist, was raised up. Cha Mu-gyeol continued his series of punches. The aftershocks and their pressure were so strong that they were literally slamming into the wall of a touchy with a swollen cheek. Readers could even notice how a small stream of air appeared in the space. The comments seemed to explode again. Users called the main character quite agile, despite his problems with excess weight. In the next episode, the character pulled a satisfied grin, because he was sure of his victory. The guy hit his opponent, thus bringing him to the floor, which could even be traced in slow motion. That's just Baek Ju-sung didn't fall in one place. He literally rolled across the stone floor, heading towards where his comrades were standing and watching the situation. And those, in turn, spread their arms and looked at the school bully, after which clouds of dust rose, without even trying to stop him. In the next moment, the story focuses readers' attention on Cha Mu-gyeol, who straightened his silhouette and impressively watched his abusers. His slightly arched thick eyebrows and slightly parted plump lips against the background of plump cheeks gave him a relaxed look, as if almost all the work had already been done. The guy even breathed steadily, suggesting to the audience that he was not tired in any way. However, according to commentators, it was too much. Moreover, as it became known thanks to several of them, strangers have already reported this. Suddenly, two dark silhouettes appeared on the right side of the main character. One of the men gave an order that everyone stay in their seats. In the next episode, the story allowed readers to take a closer look at them. They were law enforcement officers who wore black trousers with a molding of this color and a blue long-sleeve shirt with a badge on it. The policeman angrily asked the students a question, demanding that they tell them what they were doing. Commentators at this moment turned to strangers and asked them to grab Cha Mu-gyeol. Suddenly, Baek Ju-sung, who had a red nose, entered the dialogue. He was bleeding from there, and not only. Apparently, his mouth was also injured. The schoolboy pointed his index finger at his opponent and, wrinkling his face, made it clear to the police that he had attacked him. The screams of the school bully were accompanied by a shift in the focus of the story from him to Cha Mu-gyeol, who continued to stand and watch him, holding both hands in blue gloves. Yeon-mina continued to shoot with her phone all this time, holding a black tripod and standing a little to the side. Suddenly, in the next episode, the narrative began to describe the reaction of two policemen. They furrowed their brows and watched the students for a while. Baek Ju-sung, with a swollen face, scolded the main character and said that now he was finished. Moreover, now his whole life will be ruined because of such a terrible act. The school bandit's face was frozen with a grin and a smug expression of facial expressions that spoke of his self-confidence. That's just how things turned out differently. Readers may have noticed how one of the policemen squatted down next to Baek Ju-sung, who had a question on his face, and only thanks to his bulging eyes and surprise, it became clear that the situation had turned far from in his favor. He even opened his mouth. The guy was looking down somewhere, and in the next episode, the reason became clear. It consisted of handcuffs that were fixed on his hands. Mentally, the bully tried to understand why everything happened like that. After a short period of time, it became known that Baek Ju-sung was arrested on charges of making fun of a minor. A policeman with an angry expression on his face said that he had the right to remain silent. That's just the guy, in turn, freaked out. He pointed at Cha Mu-gyeol and asked why they were arresting him, because they had to do it with the main character. In the next episode, readers could notice how some kind of countdown was going, reaching the mark from 128 to 129. At this moment, an overweight student was twirling a smartphone in his left hand, on the screen of which something was depicted. The guy put his right hand in his pocket and pulled a smug smile. As it turned out, the character showed him a video of his jumps, curious in advance that he had really forgotten about him. Moreover, all this time Cha Mu-gyeol kept all these videos and photos in which classmates made fun of him. From this information, horror froze on Baek Ju-sun's face, which was accentuated by the shadow on his eyes. And at the last moment, the guy uttered words according to which it was not his life that was destroyed, but his abuser, that is, Baek Ju-sun. New comments poured in. Based on them, people began to doubt the veracity and authenticity of the video, but others now called the victim not a bully, but the main character. Readers may have noticed how two policemen led away a school bandit, leaving behind only a long shadow. That's just some commentators wondered why they did something like that over Cha Mu-gyeol if he was good in battle. Moreover, they could not come to a unanimous conclusion who made him an outcast, making the audacious assumption that it was Baek Ju-sung, whose bloodied face still reflected fear. According to the viewers of the live broadcast, it was a good way to educate bullies. One of them, with his eyes wide open, was trying to come to his senses. Suddenly, an overweight character entered the dialogue. He said out loud that Malcolm X had once said that his attacks were not called elimination when it was done for defensive purposes. This is the carrier of the name of intelligence. The main character, with a confident expression on his face, said that he had been an outcast for a long time. Money was taken from him. They made fun of him almost every day. And that was the reason why he learned to box, to be a reasonable person. After these words, the story focused on his fist. Apparently, it was difficult for the guy to talk about it. Of course, Cha Mu-gyeol was willing to gladly accept any punishment for what he did today, but he just wanted everyone to know that what the character did was a way of self-defense. The schoolboy lowered his head because he was remorseful. Moreover, after some time of silence, it became known that the main character, studying martial arts, found what he really wanted to do. The school bullies, Baek Ju-sun's friends, watched Cha Mu-gyeol's actions with open mouths, even when he said that he wanted to become stronger. The reason was not only that the guy wanted to be free from fun, but he wanted to be able to fight with more experienced people. At that moment, Yeon-mina said out loud that the number of viewers continued to grow, which greatly pleased her. The main character said that this was the reason why he would like to take part in The Real Fighter. Such reaction and attitude of Cha Mu-gyeol excited commentators who considered it a good ending for the story. Moreover, everyone expressed words of support to him. In the next episode, the picture focuses readers' attention on a bright room, in the middle of which there was a huge wooden table, behind which sat a silhouette in a gray suit. On the contrary, he had a character in brown. He gathered both hands behind his back and watched his interlocutor. As it turned out, the two men were watching a live broadcast on which Cha Mu-gyeol dealt a crushing blow to Baek Ju-sun. It was Jang Yong-gil. Even if it was just a coincidence, the situation looked strange. At that moment, the commentators called the name of Cha Mu-gyeol. They believe that if the guy trains more, he has every chance to become better than another person with the same name. The character in the brown suit said that it was really strange, because even their fighting style was similar. Readers got acquainted with the secretary of the head of the RFC office, Woo Hyun-chul. Jang Yong-gil replied to him, saying that Cha Mu-gyeol was not one of those who would secretly train a successor because he was too busy fighting and training, and so he made an offer to visit him. However, the secretary made it clear that the main character was still a minor. Moreover, it could have a bad effect on middle and high school students. The gray-haired man asked him if Mr. Java knew the principle of their business, because the goal was not to be clean, but to make money by giving people what they wanted to see. They have always loved to watch fights, since the days of dog fights and fights in basements. This instinct did not weaken. However, Cha Yong-gil guaranteed that even the minister would be watching their real fighter. In the next episode, the story described a group of guys who were in the locker room, as well as viewers with cameras. Han Gi-ju said that 3 strikes were made in 2 minutes, which was too difficult for the first qualifying round. However, Kang Hae-min didn't think so, because if you look at Chang Chun-min, Ba Krasin, Ki Won-gi, they fought at the appropriate levels. The girl replied that even considering 1 hit, it is a miracle. But the guy didn't understand why they considered 3 necessary. As it turned out, President Chan developed these requirements to make it easier for him to choose a fighter. They came to the conclusion that he was old-fashioned. Han Kai-ju asked if Cha Mu-gyeol would succeed, hoping that he would show his best side. Now he was the creator of martial arts issues. However, the girl saw someone, which made both of them turn their heads. She thought she saw Cha Mu-gyeol, but the guy thought they should have interviewed him, except it turned out to be true. The main character said that he was now in his best condition. The narrative of a fascinating story begins with a description of natural beauty. The sun was shining brightly outside, illuminating the green edges of lush trees with its rays. Readers get acquainted with someone's stream of thoughts, according to which the talking character has always been interested in something. He wondered why the main characters of comics and short stories like to choose difficult paths so much. The silhouette of a man with brown tousled hair appeared before the eyes of the audience. He held a sword in his right hand and ran along a bare path in a grove decorated with various flowers and plants. Then the picture allowed us to see his expression a little closer, increasing the angle. The stranger had a sharp nose and a square chin. He had dark eyes that emphasized thin eyebrows. Suddenly, this character stopped and turned his head over his right shoulder, casting a cursory glance somewhere behind his back and opening his mouth without making a sound. According to the narrator, if someone really wanted to take possession of something, then shouldn't he do everything possible to get what he wanted? The man with the sword suddenly rolled on the ground, turning somersaults several times. Although, judging by his facial expressions, the guy did not plan such a maneuver. In the process, he cursed and cursed everything, apparently due to the fact that the foundation was solid, and therefore it was somewhat inconvenient. When suddenly the hero stopped and looked in front of him with a surprised look and, opening his mouth, asked a question. He was interested in what was happening. The man put his right leg on his knee, and on the second he rested his hand, which was free. Then he stood up. As it became known after a short period of time, a silhouette of a mysterious character appeared in front of him, whose face was hidden by the shadow from the hood of a black cloak. Initially, it might have seemed that this hero appeared out of thin air, because he imperceptibly appeared from somewhere above. A guy already known to readers asked why everything was happening like this. It was even possible to trace how the aura thickened around him, acquiring a dark and repulsive shade, and beads of sweat appeared on his face. It was only in the next episode that it finally became clear that this man was angry, because he did not understand why this figure was chasing him. The character shouted at the top of his voice with a demanding tone and gave up his fist, pointing at him. Suddenly, an unfamiliar energy appeared in the space, which had a disgusting black color mixed with red. Some stream of magic of unimaginable power with a purple hue flashed near the left side of the man with the sword, causing him to freeze. He took a step back, thus keeping his balance, and stared at a new kind of danger. In the next episode, the hero grabbed his stomach with his free hand and crouched down, screaming in pain. He did it so unexpectedly that when the sword fell to the ground, small sparks appeared after it. But suddenly a foot in a black boot appeared in front of the guy's nose, which raised dust after itself. The man raised his head and cast a wary glance at his opponent, still barely asking him a question, according to which he wanted to know the reason. Finally, the mysterious character entered into a dialogue. Readers were allowed to see his face up close. However, it was half covered by a black mask, so the story described only his black eyes with pointed eyebrows, which were slightly covered by a grown black bang. The guy looked at his opponent with a menacing look and repeated his question. Suddenly, he grabbed the man by the right hand, in which there was a sword, and he, in turn, did not have time to react and somehow push him away. So all he did was pull away slightly, sitting on the cold ground. He even opened his mouth and silently followed the follower's movements. The man, whose face was hidden by a black mask, was watching the character when blood suddenly appeared. When the mysterious guy threw a harmless opponent, he stood on both legs, spreading his arms in different directions, thus showing that he was holding no cold weapon. And then he became curious, although it might seem that he wanted to make sure that the following judgment was correct. The stranger asked the sitting man about the fact that it was much easier to kill others and take their things. His silhouette was illuminated by the bright sun. As readers might have noticed for themselves, this character was very tall and well built. But in the next episode, they could see around his opponent small drops left after the red liquid. The pursuer strained his eyebrows, which made the expression of his eyes seem very malicious. He was waiting for his interlocutor to say at least one word. That's just that he was not in the mood for a decent dialogue, because the man wanted to be left behind with a demanding tone of voice. Moreover, this ill-mannered hero called the stranger a psycho, arguing that if he was so good, then he should have hunted high-level players. He was bursting with anger because, in his opinion, the mysterious guy clung only to beginners. In the next episode, this man stood up, focusing on his bloody hand. When the pursuer approached the opponent, who was a head shorter than him, he asked him, trying to understand. In fact, he did not understand anything. He grabbed him by the chin, which surprised him, but kept an angry expression on his face. And in the next moment, the aura thickened around the two men, acquiring an ominous dark shade. Readers may have noticed how the secretive guy dealt a crushing blow to the unintelligent interlocutor. But he explained. The hero fell to the ground, picked up small clouds of dust from the ground. As it became known after a short period of time, it was convenient for the pursuer and easier. His tall and muscular figure, which could be seen even through the brown and black uniforms, towered over the dead body of his opponent, which was now hidden by lush bushes. The stranger strained his dark eyebrows, thus emphasizing the eyes, around which there were small wrinkles. He, like a hawk, watched the response of his prey. The story told readers that it was a game with full immersion and virtual reality. It was called August. In the next episode, someone's feet appeared on the horizon, shod in brown boots. That's just when they were confidently walking on the ground, when suddenly they began to rise. However, the picture continued to explain. It was an RPG in a fantasy world. Before the eyes of the audience appeared a tall castle made of white stone, the facade of which was decorated with tall trees and bushes, which from afar, as it might seem, were blue and purple. This building was located on a high cliff, from which a rather large waterfall descended. He was being watched by an already well-known stalker in a dark cloak. As it turned out, this game was famous for complete freedom of action and a huge world. Of course, such a diamond instantly attracted the attention of many gamers. In the next episode, readers were shown a place that looked like a market or a meeting for knights. Each of them had their own equipment. Someone even moved on unusual animals similar to turtles. Today it is the #1 game with tens of millions of users. She was the best in the whole wide world. The story once again focused readers' attention on a mysterious man in a black hood and mask. He watched closely as his rival disappeared, whose immobilized body began to turn into blue pixels. And in the next episode, it could have been noticed how two tables appeared in front of the stranger's face, whose edges seemed to be decorated with red lace. The guy looked at them and relaxed his facial expressions. As it turned out, he was surprised to some extent, because the man, just like the audience, did not know what kind of window it was. According to one of them, the character killed the user, which increased the level of notoriety, which now numbered 1,000,001. The number of his points exceeded 1,000,000, which meant that the level was huge. But, based on the other, the player was informed that he was awarded. The man received the worst criminal award. When he saw the last message, he took off his black mask out of surprise, thus revealing a full view of his face. A guy with a furious tone of voice shouted, cursing at the same time about what he had done to deserve the title of being called the worst, arguing his behavior by the fact that he had knocked out not so many players. And the next moment, O paused a little and looked down, thinking. After a short period of time, he made the assumption that there were a maximum of 100,000. But he did not stop at this number, because now it seemed to him that there were more of them. The character held his chin with his left hand and gave himself up to his thoughts, lowering the second limb to the belt. As it turned out, this man has been fighting with many people for 2 years. In the next episode, he pulled a slight grin and said out loud that he needed to look at his achievements. Releasing the steam of air, the hero saw in front of him a sign of dark red with a hint of black, on which the text was written. According to him, the achievement of the worst criminal added 100% to the damage when attacking a person. Moreover, its bearer was now considered the person in whose world the most murders were, and his name was now known throughout the continent. And also a man will be feared by all races, and people will shake at the mention of his name alone. That's just, apparently, he didn't care at all, because he found it not bad that his new status doubled his damage to people. And in his thoughts he was thinking about the fact that the witness was not nearby, and that guy was in battle, so he would not be able to take a screenshot. In his opinion, it was perfect. The character said out loud that now he needed to clean up his tracks in that place and leave as soon as possible. He glanced at the small tablets that were floating in the air and noticed that a detection skill had been activated. As it turned out, a person was found within a radius of 50 meters. The mysterious man in the black hood ran away because he made the assumption that it was a suspicious coincidence that arose at the wrong time. The next moment, the thought occurred to him that it was a bounty hunter. The guy disappeared behind a tree, pulling a victorious smile as if he had caught someone red-handed. The player decided that for now he needed to hide somewhere. Suddenly, somewhere in the depths of the grove, a tall black silhouette appeared. In the next episode, readers could see him a little closer. It was a man in a black kimono, with a long sword hanging on his left side. Above his head, you could see the inscription, Goovy. What attracted the attention of the main character, because he was surprised by a rather strange name. This character with short dark hair had a sharp chin and a frowning expression. He looked somewhere to the right side, and then returned his gaze forward. At this moment, the man continued to study the player who suddenly appeared, wondering in his head why he did not have a rank. Moreover, he concluded that he had fabric armor, and the sword, whose end went behind his back, looked cheap. According to the pursuer, all his equipment was unpretentious. Suddenly, readers could notice how Goofy turned his body in the direction of the tree, behind which the dim silhouette of the main character was hiding, who summed up his study by saying that the guy smelled of poverty. That's just the faded figure of a man in a black raincoat turned around, turning his head over his left shoulder. As it became known after a short period of time, he decided to hunt someone else. The character pulled his hood lower and with a calm measured step rushed in the opposite direction from the new hero. He argued his behavior by saying that it was time to finally find another prey. However, suddenly someone's words were heard, according to which the burning man found something or someone. The guy in the black hood stopped, somewhat surprised. Suddenly, he unfolded his body, which became visible in an instant. The main character grabbed his sword and stood in an attacking pose, simultaneously reflecting on how he was noticed. By making a swinging motion with a cold weapon, the man provoked the appearance of a stream of air, because of which his cloak fluttered. A mysterious character entered the battle, whom the main character took to a beggar. He also grabbed his sword, stabbing it and stepping back. As it turned out, he fell on the weapon of the guy in the black hood. His sword broke in two. Moreover, according to the following episode, the character was injured. He knelt down, throwing everything out of his hands. Mentally, he reflected on the fact that this could not be true, and after a short period of time, the main character fell face down. Readers may have noticed how the earth began to turn red. The man's eyes began to close from impotence, and the last thing he saw was the figure of a mysterious character in a faithful kimono. In his head, the main character put a brand on the weakling, because of which he was injured. Suddenly, a window with an inscription appeared in space, according to which the guy died. As it turned out, due to the fact that the man had a high level of notoriety, his killer will not be punished in the future. The system informed him that he was the worst criminal in history, and as a punishment for death, he would not be allowed to enter the game for the next 24 hours. The main character will be imprisoned in the Great Clock Prison. After some time, the story developed inside a bright office, in the center of which there was a round table surrounded by 4 chairs. There were doors with numbers on the walls of this room. Suddenly one of them, number 3, was opened by a man with dark hair. He swore at the top of his voice and began to leave the enclosed space in which the computer and the chair were located. This character grabbed his head with his right hand, pulling his lush hair. As it turned out, murderers with a high level of notoriety often became victims of more serious punishments. As an example, the picture cited a man in a black raincoat who had 1,000,000 points of notoriety. Moreover, when someone died in the game, his level dropped, and all the items that were in the inventory dropped out. The main character thought to himself, trying to verify the truthfulness of the statement according to which he died. And he didn't like it. In the new episode, the character stepped on his eyebrows, which made his expression more serious. He was holding a blue iron jar in his right hand, from which he took a sip the next moment. As the guy put it out loud, as soon as he remembered about it, he immediately became angry and annoyed. Suddenly he handed over the jar, which caused liquid to pour out of it. The man wanted to know who the person who dared to do this to him was. According to the main character, for the simple and obvious reason that he was the worst criminal in the world, he will have to bear a rather serious punishment. He put his left hand in his pocket, and with his right he threw the cereal jar into the trash can. The character decided to make an attempt to enter the game a little later to see how things would be. He rested his chin on his fist and looked up. However, in the next episode, the guy was behind bars. He was wearing a long white shirt with black pants. He held onto the handrails and stared ahead, suddenly surprised. It was a great 1-hour prison. The top of a 100-meter mountain. A huge hill appeared before the eyes of readers, on which there was some kind of castle. The space had a dark shade, from which goosebumps ran. The system notified the main character that his crimes were so numerous that no list was enough for them. Moreover, the Ruin Empire had stripped him of his rights, and there was no trial for the simple and obvious reason that the character was a successful criminal. And based on the next window, the Empire sentenced him to life in prison. The story continues its rapid development. This time, the narrative describes how the game system notified the main character that the Empire had sentenced him to life in prison. From this shock thought, the man's face became puzzled. He looked up and opened his mouth, not making a sound and still holding on to the 2 handrails. The next moment, the guy suddenly started laughing. That's just it, wasn't out of happiness, but out of despair. The main character began to knock loudly, demanding in such a way that he was at least given a trial and quickly sentenced. Because, in his opinion, it was far from funny. Now his expression became angry. The player strained his eyebrows and closed his jaws, baring his snow-white teeth. But suddenly something caught his attention. The guy took his right hand to the side, carefully watching her. And then he did the same with the left, watching the same questioningly. In the next episode, the main character looked at his body with a surprised look, at the same time cursing at the top of his voice. He raised his right leg and asked the question as if he wasn't alone. The man was interested in why he was dressed this way. Instantly the main character, taken aback, because some crazy thought was born in his head. He definitely did not like the current situation. A window of red mixed with black hung in space, in which there were dark green cells. It was inventory. The guy brought his index finger closer to it and began leafing through it. As it turned out, the list was completely empty. The system informed him that the player was currently serving a prison sentence, which meant that all his items had been confiscated. Moreover, even worse, the skills of the main character were also blocked, and the levels were lowered. From such negative information for the character, he screamed at the top of his voice, cursing everyone who allowed it. Being behind the prison, the men pondered what he had to do now. The picture took him in close-up, revealing a view of the guard standing next to him, who all this time heard his indignation that there were things that could and could not be touched. The guard touched his left ear and asked the void out loud, wondering why the prisoner was shouting so much, when suddenly the main character fell to the floor, uttering the last cursing word. In his head, he sent this game into the abyss, referring to the fact that it was definitely some kind of bug. He said out loud that he should have quit the game, since it was so disgusting. The guy put his right hand on his leg, leaning on the other, when suddenly he noticed something. The main character turned his head to the left and looked down. As it turned out, there was a white bone lying next to him. He pushed her away, asking a question, according to which the guy was curious about what it was. The bone flew quite far away and hit some black silhouette, which, in fact, the main character noticed. He got up on both feet, keeping his balance, and cast a surprised glance in that direction. As it turned out, the man saw a skeleton, the reason for which he thought. Suddenly, the character noticed a brown bundle that was locked in his jaw. The main character came closer and grabbed him, pulling him out. In the next episode, the system informed him that the man had found the trace of the king for the first time. As it turned out, it was the first time he had encountered his will. The guy unfolded the paper and began to reason over what was written in it. A new sign hung in space, which was ominously purple in color, with words written on it, according to which someone was used to being worse than others. In his glory years, he was the Lord of Shadows and the rulers of the Valley of Darkness. This character was the king of all criminals. That's just the main character is not interested. He closed his eyes and said out loud that he understood the hint and wanted to skip the introduction. But the narrative continued. It described how the stranger became a problem for the heroes of the 10 kingdoms and continents. They were probably jealous of how many treasures he had. And for this simple and obvious reason, he was declared the worst of evils. Then the hunt for his head began. The main character glanced at the skeleton and the cloak and made the assumption out loud that he was offended and robbed by these heroes of the 10 kingdoms. After all, there was so much bragging in him, and he himself was robbed. Except the Shadow King paid them back in kind. The man didn't understand what this meant, but the next moment he exclaimed that he didn't care, referring to the fact that at first it was pretty good, and then it got boring. He put his right hand on his side and made a swing with his left, when the guy turned his back to the skeleton in a black robe and expressed his opinion that, in his opinion, the will of the king was nonsense. A bright blue glow appeared behind him. This made him turn his whole body around and look at what was happening in his dungeon. Readers may have noticed a bundle floating in space. According to him, one day the heir of the Shadow King was supposed to appear, who would shake their world and destroy everyone. He would steal everything that belonged to them. That's just the main character. This whole situation seemed annoying and intrusive. The piece of paper continued to be in the air. Bright light energy emanated from it. The system again notified the character that the king of the Valley of Darkness, who was unjustly condemned and condemned to death, was waiting for someone who would avenge his pain. At this moment, readers could notice how a dark aura thickened around the skeleton, which had a repulsive purple hue. In his last moments, the king sealed a special power and the protagonist was suitable for it. The system asked the character if he agreed to accept the will, provided that the levels, skills, and points would be reset. The man stared at this sign for some time in bewilderment and wondered how he should act, and in general react to it. After much thought, the guy was inspired. He covered his open mouth with joy. A radiant aura appeared around him, as if he had just received something special or precious. The main character asked the void, trying to make sure that he had just come across some hidden quest. After all, based on his next remark, he agreed to everything. When the guy brought the index finger of his right hand to the yes button, a thought suddenly occurred to him. The man was taken aback and instantly began to look upset. He looked to the right, as if he wanted to ignore the dark red window. Then he turned to the bars and began to think about something. As it turned out, the case was as follows. The character made it clear at the top of his voice that it looked very mean from the side of life. Suddenly, he fell to his knees, hitting himself hard. Although, apparently, the man did not notice it, because he was busy with something else. The main character was so deeply saddened that an aura thickened around him, acquiring a mysterious dark shade. In the next episode, it was as if tears were streaming down his face, or he was only pretending and acting, trying to find out something in this way. The guy shouted at the top of his voice that he couldn't get out of there even if he had to agree to the quest. The picture continued the rapid development of mysterious events. At this moment, the main character was sitting in a bright room with computers. He was at a round table, occupying one of the chairs. When the story zoomed in on him, readers could see how the character was holding a black smartphone in his hand and looked somehow wary. So much so that a drop of sweat appeared on his right cheek. As it turned out, the thing was that there was no information regarding the character king of the Gloomy Valley. The man found a secret quest for the first time. Only he was interested in what reason right now. The guy closed his eyes and leaned on his right hand, slightly pulling his dark hair. He indulged in his thoughts, according to which all the items were taken away from him, as well as the skills were unavailable. He leaned on the back of the computer chair, his hands on his knees, and took a deep breath, relaxing slightly in this way. In his opinion, it was terrible, because the guy even asked himself if he should have just given up. In his head, he recreated the episodes when his character stood in front of this mysterious dark red tablet with an offer to accept the will of the king of the valley. But if you think about it, then in the additional information to it, it was written that all stats will be reset. The main character was thinking about the fact that if he still accepts the quest, and all the characteristics are reset, then. That's just he didn't let readers know the end of his conclusion. The man crossed both arms over his chest and tensed his eyebrows, as if he was solving a complex mathematical problem. The next moment, the character identified something. He arched his thin eyebrows, making it seem that his eyes were burning brightly from some idea. The guy scratched his chin with his right hand and aloud made it clear to the audience that he should try. In the next episode, the story describes the actions that took place in a place where there were a lot of characters dressed in colorful gear. Everyone went about their own business, not paying attention to others. How suddenly readers could notice how someone defiantly took a step and stopped. His feet were hidden behind low brown ankle boots and with a pointed nose. As it became known after a short period of time, it was the main character. He stood in the middle of the square and, with both arms outstretched in different directions, shouted with joy that he had finally managed to do something. In the next episode, the game again focused readers' attention on a red and black tinged sign with an inscription, according to which the character was recreated. The audience was allowed to see a tall man in a black hood, whose face was half hidden by a dark cloth. This player had level 99 and pretty good equipment, which made him have a bright aura of radiance around him, as if he was some kind of diamond. And then history compared it with the current version. This character had the first level. He was wearing a white shirt on his body, but there was a kind of self-confident smile on his face, as if the man was up to something, or he was sure that something cool was waiting for him. The system notified both him and the readers that if the character in Agatha returned to the first level, then he had only two options. According to one of them, it was possible to continue from the place where he died. And based on the second, the player was allowed to return to the starting village. Suddenly, the main character raised his right hand up, directing a concentrated look at it, and announced a restart. The story described how white circles with seals formed around his brush, around which there was a bright blue glow. As it turned out, he was trying to get into the starting village. In the next episode, the man did it at all in his dungeon. Readers could notice how his whole body was enveloped in a bright blue light, which only grew. History has ruled that he chose the latter option. That's just, according to the main character, it might seem like a waste of restarting, but it took time to adapt to the new character. He looked in front of him, at the place where there were two guards dressed exactly the same. They even had about the same height. Readers may have noticed how the character was wary to some extent. The reason was that the elephants of the guard were moving in his direction. The guy exhaled in surprise, mentally asking himself why they were coming to him. Out of surprise, he covered his chin with his right hand, as if this was how the man felt safe, and waved his left. And in the next episode, the audience finally became convinced that the main character had done something illegal. He escaped from prison, and such a strange reaction followed because he had a terrible task. Readers could see how his expression changed every second. Now the guy closed his eyes and strained his thin eyebrows, covering the lower part with his palm. Only 2 guards walked past him, which surprised him to some extent. He turned back and looked at the 2 people walking away, watching them with a questioning expression on his face. Aloud, the character summed up that they ignored him, although his tone was like a shrewd one, as if the man wanted to make sure that what he saw was true. The next moment, he made the assumption that it was some other bug. A memory appeared in his head, according to which members of the guard always rushed at him with swords as soon as the main character appeared in the city. All he said out loud was that a window of characteristics had popped up in front of his face. According to him, the character's name was Luke. He had the first level, but this did not prevent him from carrying the status of the worst criminal, with the work of the best thief. Based on what was written at the bottom of the scoreboard, the man had an updated notoriety, which, by the way, surprised him to some extent. And after a short period of time, the main character's attention was attracted by a phrase that explained that a fake identity hid his evil deeds, but the punishment was still in effect. In his head, the guy summed up that now he would have to hide. Luke opened his mouth in confusion and waved his hands involuntarily, saying out loud that it was as if someone was making fun of him. Mentally, he explained to the readers that she was passive, so there had to be some skills. The man exclaimed in a demanding tone of voice so that the system would show him a window of skills, which, in fact, happened after a short period of time. The guy put his index finger to the button and said out loud with interest that he should have watched while singing some strange song. According to the new information, the passive skill was a fake identity that hid the evil deeds of the protagonist, but only the punishment was still in effect. But if we talk about an active skill, then it was a search of the first level. The guy was told that he should study things that could be stolen from the intended target, but on condition that the distance would be small. Moreover, the use of the skill will be impossible if the man saw the target, but if he moves away from her or stops looking at her, that the search will be interrupted. Another active skill was stealing, also of the first level. According to the window, the character could steal the items he found during the search. After each unsuccessful theft, the probability of success will, unfortunately, fall. And if the probability drops to 0%, the victim will notice it and take it for an attack. Such information caught the main character by surprise, because he was silent for a while, and reread the information, thinking about something in this way. He scratched his cheek and strained his eyebrows, making his gaze seem focused. In his head, the guy was taken aback and began to look out of one window, then into another, thinking that king of the valley was a very ordinary thief. When the red and black tinged scoreboard began to disappear, turning into large pixels, the main character looked away from them and looked up from dissatisfaction, because he just couldn't believe it, making the assumption the next moment that he should test his new abilities. When suddenly the story described a mysterious red flame that appeared around his eyes, painted them in the same color. It became known that it was a search skill. Readers were allowed to see how a black sign appeared around the other heroes who were on the square, which indicated what the guy was doing at that moment. In the next second, he noticed for himself that it worked not only for players, but also for NPCs. The man looked at the new window, according to which he had to choose a target. The main character turned his head over his left shoulder and looked at a character in black and red gear with very curly blonde hair, who was talking to a player in a black robe. His face was hidden. Pulling an evil smile from ear to ear, the man made a firm decision that he would fit. In the next episode, whistling slightly and putting both hands behind his back, he walked past 2 other young people who were animatedly having a dialogue about something. The system showed readers that the target had been selected. The search of the user under the name of Seng Galchai began, and the main character was convinced of how it worked. When the scoreboard in red with a black tint showed the guy that the objects of the goal were stealing a rabbit, bandages and glass beads, the man exclaimed joyfully that he liked it very much, because he was even allowed to inspect the inventory. In his opinion, it was a great ability. He forced a smile again, only now it revealed a view of his snow-white teeth. The guy looked at the other 2 people, folding both hands on his chest, as if he had accidentally noticed them. But the search was interrupted for the simple and well-known reason that the distance to the target was too large. And in the next episode, readers finally managed to find out the name of the main character, because Yu Seok-woo was setting himself up not to get upset. The picture described how his red eyes again began to blaze with a mysterious fire, which meant that he again began to try his new abilities. Mentally, he came to the conclusion that he had many more targets that he would like to try to search. It began to get light outside. The blue clear sky acquired bright orange and pink colors. But the main character was still in the square. He was the only one. The guy walked confidently under the tall houses and pondered. According to one of his thoughts, the man was firmly convinced that he would hit someone, so he had to keep an eye on everything. And the reason was that the chance of a successful theft depended on it. Yu Seok-woo was turning his head in different directions when suddenly something caught his attention. As it turned out, the case consisted in a large physique of a man who was sleeping right on the street, with his back against a stone wall, and his legs spread out in different directions, thus maintaining balance. Apparently, this character was a cook, because he wore a white uniform with a cap. The main character looked at him and stopped, covering his mouth with his hand, because he was stretched with joy and anticipation. In his head, the guy thought that he had to steal from someone who probably wouldn't notice it, and the sleeping stranger will be the first victim. Yu Seok-woo stretched out his left hand in the direction of the player, which caused a mysterious red glow in the form of smoke to appear around it. As it turned out, this is how the search of the target began. That's just, he turned out to be not a user, but an NPC resident. The system board showed the main character that the stranger had a rusty dagger, which greatly pleased the guy who exclaimed mentally about it. The following episode describes how the man's right hand was covered with an intimidating blue aura with a red tint mixed with black. The main character pulled a victorious smile from ear to ear, baring his snow-white teeth. So the theft ability was activated, and in the new scoreboard it was indicated that it had begun. The story tells readers about how Yu Seok-woo grabbed a cold rusty weapon, just stretching out his right hand through a red window that looked like a portal. In the new chapter, the audience became aware, based on the black table, that the theft had begun. The main character stretched out his right hand, which seemed to disappear into the portal, and grabbed a rusty dagger. When he was convinced that he was real, the guy opened his mouth for joy, without uttering a word out loud. His eyebrows were tense, which made his gaze seem somewhat insidious. The new ability worked. A new red window with a dark shade appeared in front of Yu Seok-woo's face, according to which the theft was committed successfully because the man received a rusty dagger. The more experience and skill level he has grown, as well as the level of notoriety. In his thoughts, the main character considered successful the fact that he managed to get experience points. After all, if this continues, that man will be pumped much faster than last time. He concluded to himself that he should have stolen only in dullards. Yu Seok-woo turned his back on his recent goal and walked away from him. A new thought rang in his head, according to which he was deciding who should be clean next in line. When suddenly his thoughts were interrupted. A stranger in the square was surprised that his interlocutor had a high-level item. However, the bald man showed him, presenting his index finger to his mouth, that he should behave quietly. His buddy thought it was pretty cool, and so he exclaimed that he was jealous. The main character stopped at this time and turned his head slightly, glancing at the talking players. At the next moment, the guy had a question in his head. He was wondering if what he had heard regarding the player having a high-level item was really true. But his face reflected a satisfied smile from ear to ear, as if he had already made a decision a long time ago. As it turned out, in August, all subjects were divided into several categories. Some were considered ordinary. After them came rare, unique, heroic ones, and finally, legendary artifacts. However, readers have learned that only one such item has now been found. Even if the quality was only one step higher than usual, then often such things had interesting buffs that could be useful until the character becomes a high-level player. And if the item had some special characteristic, then it could be sold very expensively. Yu Seok-woo looked at the other man and reflected on the fact that he had managed to get a powerful item and brought it to the starting village. At the next moment, the guy made a firm decision that he would be his next victim. The story began with the story of how the main character confidently walked behind a new goal, removing both hands behind his back. He was so close to them that he could hear their conversation, according to which a friend asked the guy if he would use it himself or sell it. To which the man, in turn, made it clear that first he would find out the value of the item, and only then he would think what to do with it. In Yu Seok-woo's mind, a thought was heard, according to which his new target should always remain alert, because otherwise, such as the main character, there would be a chance of theft. The story describes that the square again became filled with people who were lining up at some stall. From the ballet, one could hear a conversation between his master and a friend and a magician. The first one said that he would give 2 silver coins for the object he was holding in his hand, but his interlocutor was dissatisfied, and therefore he offered 5. One of the two characters was surprised at how long the queue was, to which he heard the answer that they could not do something about it, and they would have to wait. The main character mentally came to the conclusion that this was his chance. He tensed his eyebrows, which made his face look more intimidating, as if he was planning something bad. In the next moment, his eyes were covered with a scarlet flame, and his teeth bared in a contented mood. The search of the target has begun. That's just the system opened a red window with a dark shade, which told that the prey had only useless junk, bandages, and broken swords. Yu Seok-woo cursed inwardly because he didn't expect that there would be so many useless items. According to another scoreboard, the character had a snail shell, beautiful pebbles, and barley bread. After that, the main character already doubted that the player had anything high level at all. When suddenly the window, after showing a hood, a bitten apple, and a piece of glass, attracted attention to an unidentified object. There was a bright green glow around this inscription, as if it was special. In his head, the guy exclaimed that this was it. That's just the item could not be stolen, which somewhat puzzled the man who was interested in what the reason was. According to the recognition, some items could not be stolen until they were identified. This meant that first, it was necessary to carry out recognition. At this moment, the stall owner exclaimed that the next one would come, thus interrupting him from his thoughts. Yu Seok-woo cursed to himself when he heard this, and turned out to set himself up on a positive wave. Because he simply could not give up, so he decided to at least try. The guy raised his left hand and opened his mouth without making a sound. Suddenly, a bright red glow appeared from his palm. As it turned out, it was a recognition ability. In the next episode, readers will follow the progress of this force, which now totaled as much as 14%. And after a short period of time he became 46. The main character exclaimed joyfully that everything worked out, because the number continued to grow. Moreover, it's almost over and there's not much left. Viewers could notice how the character even folded his hands into fists in amazement, because the mark reached 72%. At this very moment, the stall owner stretched out his right hand in a gesture so that both men would show their magic item to him so that he could examine it and estimate the price. The first guy replied to his interlocutor, holding a bag of money that he had finished, and asked him to evaluate his subject, to which he gave a positive answer. However, such a rush on the part of strangers did not please the main character at all, because he mentally asked the system to work faster. Suddenly everything was ready. Recognition was successful. There was even a small drop of sweat on Yu Seok-woo's face, for the simple and obvious reason that he managed to identify the item. His right hand continued to pulse and emit a dark blue light with a red tinge. This meant that the theft ability was activated. When the bald character put down his bag and said, after greeting at the same time, that he needed to evaluate something, he received a question from a member of the staff, according to which he wanted to know if it was a special item. That's just something like surprise appeared on his face, because he didn't know where this thing had gone. Suddenly, the stall owner asked if he really had nothing, so he asked the next one to come up. However, the main character unexpectedly entered the dialogue, who was playing his game. He pointedly stabbed a bald man with a bag in the shoulder and asked him if he would stick around in this place until tomorrow, and make honest people wait in this way, so he asked him to move away. The stranger turned his head over his right shoulder and looked at Yu Seok-woo, whose face was showing something like anger. That's just a character who had a special subject. He really wanted to object, but he was interrupted again by the main character, rude to him why he just kept silent. When the guy approached the stall owner, he handed him his edged weapon, which he had stolen some time ago, and said he wanted to sell it. His interlocutor pointedly chuckled, as if he was thinking about something, and summed up aloud that it was a rusty dagger. He began to examine it. But the picture in the next episode focused readers' attention on two men, one of whom was trying to support the second. The character made the assumption that his special item disappeared due to a bug in the game, so he decided to file a complaint. A bald guy with a drooping expression walked next to him and asked aloud if he would be returned a valuable thing. The story described to the audience how Yu Seok-woo was moving, happily turning his head in different directions. He was somewhere between the houses, because there were only brick walls around him. In the new episode, he asked himself a question. The guy wondered if he could now check his new find. A black plaque with the name of the inventory appeared in front of his face, which was covered with sweat from nerves and worries. That's what he clicked on. After a short, and even instantaneous, period of time, the entire space around the main character began to glow green, which made him alert and closely monitor the system window. The next moment, someone opened an orange soda can. It was Yu Sok W. The man gave himself up to his thoughts. As it turned out, he was amazed by the fact that he could not get this item after so many murders, but now it finally got into his hands. A satisfied grin appeared on the character's face. The story told readers that the wind bracelet was a mysterious and special object. A golden exhibit with various patterns appeared before the eyes of readers. According to the following episodes, it was a special item with a speed buff. Attack speed, to be more precise. For example, the description is conducted around the silhouette of a player who, using his sword with a black aura, provoked the appearance of a blue stream of energy, and also dexterity, so that the same user could do different flips and turns. It became known that all the characteristics associated with speed were increasing. There were no restrictions on the wind bracelet, so anyone could use such an item. It was for this simple and obvious reason that it cost a lot. The next moment, Yu Seok-woo closed his eyes and began to dream, at the same time indulging in his thoughts, which continued to fill his head. The guy made a bold assumption that perhaps his fate was the fact that he needed to become a great thief. A bright golden glow appeared around him after this remark. However, he still wanted to know the remote cost of the bracelet. The main character quickly darted towards the chair and the computer, which he instantly forced to turn on. According to this subject, there has been an interesting rumor going around among high-level players lately. As it turned out, the man was watching a live broadcast. In it, a girl with short hair and a man were having a dialogue. The heroine asked her interlocutor if he knew what was happening in the game. He, in turn, gave a positive answer. He said that there was talk that some newcomer was hunting for the first in the ranking, to which Yu Seok-woo said that someone was imitating him. He smiled, grinned, and began to listen further. The girl asked a question. She wondered if it wasn't Luke, the worst killer in history, who was doing this. In her opinion, it was just a coincidence, because thanks to one of the players, they recognized the hunter's appearance. The guy and the girl made an offer to take a closer look at him. It was the same character who killed the main character in the game, to which, of course, he objected. The moments when the guy was hunting for him, before delivering a crushing blow, popped up in his head. From just this thought, Yu Seok-woo became embittered. He slammed his left hand menacingly on the table and thought that he would never forget his face. The story began the narrative around a rather strange conversation. Someone said that 6 had already fallen, and they had 8 more to deal with. Moreover, in their opinion, it was to some extent a difficult situation. As it turned out, the action developed the reader's interest regarding the 10th meeting of the heads of the best guild of August. A huge round table with several high-backed chairs appeared before their eyes. They were occupied by mysterious black silhouettes. Someone from the circle asked a question out loud, according to which the player had a desire to find out where this goovy came from. He pointedly tapped his index finger on the table, as if it hurt him. His neighbor replied that he had tried to find out, but so far he had not managed to dig up information that would be worth something. The third one laughed at all, because, in his opinion, it was about an unofficially high-level guy. The fourth silhouette adjusted his hood and wondered why he appeared at that moment. The next stranger summed up that they needed to deal with him as quickly as possible. But, as the sixth objected, they didn't even know how to catch him. Someone made a verdict, according to which this mysterious, but rather strong player looked like Luke, which greatly surprised everyone present, because readers could see their astonished eyes, even though they were hidden by a black mantle. Some embittered character from the circle asked the speaker a question. He asked why he even dared to remember the name of someone so greedy, and the other picked up his mood and said out loud that he felt sick at the very thought. Suddenly, the story decided to remind the audience what this hatch looked like. Around the main character, dressed in black equipment, there was a red energy that repelled. 4 men, heads of different guilds. Compared to him, Goovy was a real angel. Suddenly, someone raised a hand in a gesture for the others to stop arguing and calm down. He objected, wondering if it was time to think about how to get rid of the arrogant player. The story showed readers his face. He had dark eyes and slightly overgrown hair that covered his high forehead. The guy folded his hands and put his head on them, watching the reaction of his comrades. As it became known based on the new episode, it was the head of the Goblin Guild. His name was Racino. In his opinion, each of them had to try for the sake of a great cause. Then the action again unfolds around the square, which was filled with warriors dressed in different equipment. At this moment, the main character indulged in his thoughts. According to his thoughts, the guy was firmly convinced that he had felt something strange even then. Yu Seok-woo remembered Goovy's face and wondered how he didn't understand how he dared to kill him, a high-level player, and even in such a cheap outfit. Then he turned his head over his right shoulder and looked with a menacing expression at the 2 men who were standing and talking in that direction. According to the man, it will take him some time to regain his former strength, but one day he will definitely do it. In the next episode, readers could notice how his right hand shone blue with purple and red tints. This mysterious and sinister energy was drawn to the two strangers who were engaged in conversation. And then the audience was allowed to see how the eyes of the main character were covered with red flames. His gaze was focused on finding interesting things that he could steal. As it turned out, Yu Seok-woo still took the items, and the dark window of the system notified the man that the theft was successful, which is why he had increased experience and skill level, and even the level of notoriety. When the guy looked at this, his expression became somewhat upset and even wary. The weather was sunny, so Yu Seok-woo calmly strolled through the quiet, untidy streets and enjoyed his day. Suddenly, he opened the stats window by tapping on it with his right index finger. In the next episode, the story informed readers that Luke had risen to the 4th level, which greatly pleased him. He could not have imagined that he would be able to reach it in 2 days. After all, at this rate, he will be able to reach the 10th in just a week. Suddenly someone interrupted him, calling him a friend and apologizing. The man turned his head in the direction from which the noise was coming. As it turned out, 2 men with insidious smiles approached Yu Seok-woo. The first of them, a tall man with 2 large scars on his face, asked him to give them just a minute. And the second, bald and shorter, raised up the index finger of his right hand and picked up the remark of his friend, adding that wasn't the main character supposed to answer when someone from the elders spoke to him. In his head, the guy compared them to unintelligent life forms. The second man turned to his friend and let him know that he had scared this boy, who at that time scratched his temple and looked at them in bewilderment. And the first one made it clear to him not to be afraid, because they were good guys, but they had a difficult situation. After this phrase, the player with 2 huge scars on his face took out his sword and began to threaten Luke by asking him a question. It became known to readers that he was interested in whether the main character would unite with them. However, the latter, in turn, silently turned around and, in a gesture that he did not really want, began to walk with both hands in his pockets. Suddenly, something caught his attention. Yu Seok-woo looked up at the blackboard with red edges that appeared, according to which the guy could accept an unexpected quest. After a short period of time, it became known that according to the task, the man had to clear the village of evil. The difficulty level was normal, but the bandits, who usually hid in the alleys, wanted to get into a fight with him. Moreover, they often disturbed the residents, and for this simple and obvious reason, Luke had to teach them a lesson that they would remember forever. The condition of the unexpected quest was to overcome 2 village criminals, for which he would receive a reward from the head of the village when he completed the task. A thought arose in the man's head, based on which he decided to try his luck, because in any case he was already in that place. The guy pulled a satisfied smile from ear to ear and looked somewhere to the right. Suddenly, he called out to 2 characters, insulting them to some extent. Why did they quickly cast their eyes at him and began to listen attentively? Yu Seok-woo, or rather his character Luke, pointed at the bandits and asked them a question. As it turned out, he was wondering if they were too talkative. In his opinion, they should have held their long tongues. The man with 2 scars on his face tensed his eyebrows, as did his companion, and cursed out loud. And then he began to run in the direction of the main character, holding a sword in his right hand at the same time. The story continues its exciting and rapid development. This time, she begins the narrative around the main character, who quickly dodged blows from a bandit with 2 scars on his face who used a sword, when suddenly he tripped his opponent, and he, in turn, did not have time to react, so the next second he rolled head over heels on the stone floor. When he finally landed, he made a sound that meant he was in pain. The man dropped his sword from his hand that he just rolled away in the opposite direction from him. The bandit was lying on his stomach and quickly began to get up on his hands, at the same time cursing the main character. Yu Seok-woo approached him and asked him about what he had just said. The sun shone brightly on his figure, causing his face to be covered in shadow. However, this only emphasized his embittered facial features. The guy made a swinging motion with his foot and struck at his opponent. Luke enjoyed this pleasant feeling. He continued to stand over his opponent when his friend exclaimed plaintively, probably trying to make sure that he was okay. But the man did not answer anything.